Hi guys, and welcome to webinar 1 for coaching and motivation, which is unit CAM 514. Today what we're going to be covering is primarily looking at what motivation is all about and how we can apply that to your coaching when you're working with your nutrition clients. We've got a PowerPoint here of about 15 slides that's going to run through various different things that relate to the motivation process, looking at behaviour change as well. So that's our main focus. We're just going to get started now, so we'll just open up this PowerPoint. Okay, so as I said, this is the first webinar for this particular unit. The learning outcomes that we have, there are kind of 5 main ones that we're hoping to achieve today. First of all, we're going to define what motivation is and what its components are. This is primarily going to look at the different types of motivation that there are and the different components that make up motivation. Obviously, when you're working with your clients, it's important that you can motivate them first of all, but how you really go about doing that is through utilizing different motivational theories. It's not just as simple as giving some positive feedback or setting goals. You need to understand the theories that underpin the practices that you're going to be following. One of the main theories that we're going to focus on is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a really popular theory that explains motivation. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that and looking at how you can apply that to your practices as a personal trainer, but also in relation to making dietary recommendations. The next part is probably one of the main things that you guys are going to be doing with your qualification, and that's trying to change behaviour, and particularly dietary habits. We need to make sure that we understand that we're trying to change habits of a lifetime. So looking at the different theories that underpin how we change behaviour, why we change it, is really, really important. And then the final part we're going to look at is setting appropriate goals for the clients. So it's important that you understand the process. You will have set these for your clients, from completing your Cert 3 and Cert 4 in relation to exercise. A lot of the same principles still apply, but what we need to make sure that you can do is understand some of the theories that underpin goal setting, and we're going to give you a couple of hints and tips that will assist with that process. So looking at motivation, first of all. So motivation, we have a definition here in the slide, is the process that initiates, guides, and maintains goal-orientated behaviours. This is, for me, a really good definition of motivation because it incorporates so many different parts of motivation itself. The first key word for me is initiates, and this is quite often the most difficult part of motivation, is actually getting someone to take that first step. How do you light the fire that kickstarts a new behaviour? And that's something that is really a challenge for those of you in the industry trying to, I suppose, instill your values and your beliefs in your clients. And we're going to look at how you can do that. The next key word is guides. The way in which a client is motivated is going to have such a big impact on their behaviour. Are they intrinsically or extrinsically motivated? That will have a huge impact on how they respond to different challenges and situations throughout their behaviour change process. Maintains is another key point, and that's something that we'll look at in a second as well. But obviously you need to make sure that you can sustain this new behaviour that you're trying to achieve. So this new dietary plan that you've put in place for your client, how can they maintain it? They can be motivated week 1, but then are they motivated week 2, week 3, week 4? Are they motivated to stick to this change for the rest of their life? And the last part that's really good about this definition is the goal orientation. You need to have a reason why you're making the change. Without a reason of why, then what is the point in making the change in the first place? Just to give you an example, if you've got a client who's trying to change their diet and they go to a restaurant and see an unhealthy versus healthy option, if they don't have a goal or a reason to choose that healthy option, what is the chance of them actually doing that in the first place? It's probably quite limited. Relating to that definition, we'll commonly see motivation being broken down into 3 main parts. First of all, we have activation, which obviously relates to the previous definition of initiating that new behaviour. So how do we actually start it off? And that obviously from you as a trainer can come through client education. So you maybe have a client who's coming along to you and completing 3 personal training sessions a week, and now through this qualification you want to provide them with dietary advice. At the moment they maybe think their diet's fine and don't really want to make any changes, even though you know it could have a really positive impact. So through education, that's probably the best way to get that activation, that desire to start a new behaviour. Once you've started that new behaviour, the next thing you need to consider is persistence. So actually sticking to that plan and to that program, which is incredibly important, obviously. How long can you maintain it for? The next part is intensity, and this refers to how much effort or how committed you are to that particular behaviour. How motivated are you? How much effort is there? Obviously, someone can attend the gym 3 times a week. Are they sticking to the program? Are they working as hard as they can? Are they taking shortcuts? Same can be said in the diet. You know, if someone has come home from work and they know they have this healthy diet plan to follow, but it takes 5 minutes more prep time, do they have the motivation and desire and intensity to actually spend that extra 5 minutes, or do they take the shortcut? Moving on now to the 2 different forms of motivation, and I'm sure this is a term that you're all familiar with, and that's intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is the motivation that comes from within, so something from within you is motivating you to act in a particular way. Examples of this are doing it for self-achievement, for health, or just for fun. We tend to refer to these people as being task-orientated. Now, what I mean by that is that these people are motivated by the process of learning. They're motivated by the process of change. They like going through that actual process from start to finish and then seeing the end result. But the end result is not the focus for these intrinsically motivated clients. It's actually going through the process. The day-to-day activities is what really motivates them. We then have the extrinsically motivated, and this is obviously factors from out with the client that is motivated. These people are referred to as being ego-orientated, so they enjoy the external recognition that they get for their achievements. This is obviously a very common motivation type within the fitness industry. Most of the goals that you're going to be addressing are going to be around weight loss or muscle gain, where clients are looking to change their appearance. The next interactional view is talking about how these 2 link together. Now, although someone will have a motivational preference for one or the other, it's unlikely that they'll be entirely in one motivational camp, if you like. The 2 play off against each other. Just to give you a few examples of how that might apply when you're working with your clients. If you say, consider you have a client who makes a dietary change because of their health, and when they make that change, it leads to weight loss. They feel healthier, they feel better about themselves. That's obviously intrinsic motivation. However, as a result of making that change and feeling better about themselves, their appearance starts to change. They lose weight, they look healthier. They start to get recognition from friends, family members saying, oh, you look like you've lost weight, you look great, things like that. Now, just because that person is intrinsically motivated doesn't mean to say that that extrinsic motivation is going to have a negative impact on them. They will use both forms. Another way that I think that's really clearly pictured, if you like, is through professional athletes. They'll quite often take up a sport for their love of it. They really enjoy it, they enjoy the training, they enjoy the process of improving. But then as they become better at that sport, what they start to see is more external rewards get placed upon them. So they get recognized, you know, through awards or through financial gain, and that starts to motivate them as well. But at the same time, the intrinsic motivators are still there. So it's really important that you understand that even though you might block your client as an intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated client, the other form of motivation can still play a really important part. So just to compare the 2, what we've got here is a table summarizing the positives and negatives of each form of motivation. If we look at the intrinsic motivation first of all, the positives of being motivated in that way is that you generally enjoy the process of learning or changing behavior. You enjoy the day-to-day activities that it brings. One of the big positives of this is that even if there are challenges that you come across, even if there are barriers that present themselves, because you actually enjoy the process, you'll still remain motivated. It's not going to cause you to become demotivated. The great thing for us as trainers is that if someone is intrinsically motivated, we don't need to be too concerned about the external rewards. So we don't need to pay too much attention to rewarding the client with extrinsic factors. Provided we can show that they've achieved, they're having fun, we can create that environment, and that's all we need to do. The other thing about intrinsically motivated clients is they tend to be quite self-confident because they're all about improving themselves. They're not too worried about others or making that comparison, and therefore they feel comfortable with high self-esteem as well. However, there are a couple of negatives, although there are not many if I'm honest. First of all, they lack that competitive desire with others. Now, that may be an issue if you're working with athletes, for example. You want that competitive spark so that they strive to be the best that they can be, and it obviously is particularly important in competitive sports. The next negative is they don't place too much emphasis on the outcome, which can be detrimental to achievement. If you have a client who really needs to lose weight, but they focus on the process, they're not too fussed about the outcome, and sometimes that can be detrimental to achievement, although it would be rare because obviously the processes, if you follow that, then the outcome should take care of itself. One of the other negatives is that they may lack ambition. Provided they're achieving within themselves, they're happy. They maybe won't strive to be better than someone else, which might push them that little bit further. If we look at extrinsic motivation, positives, if the external rewards that you're providing as the trainer are achievable and they're attractive, then motivation is going to be extremely high. It's really important that as the trainer you identify what is achievable for that client and what is attractive to that client. Is it something they actually want? If they don't want it, then they're not going to be motivated to try and achieve it. Perhaps a positive of extrinsically motivated clients is that they're quite competitive. That competition can help to push them that little bit further. And as I said, that strong desire to be the best. Some of the negatives for those that are extrinsically motivated, they're unlikely to respond positively to failure, which means they're going to lose motivation easily if they do fail. This means that you always need to be setting your client up for success wherever possible and recognizing small achievements. This is something that's not required so much when you're working with intrinsically motivated clients. External rewards must always be provided to those that are extrinsically motivated. If they're not there, they're not going to take part. So you need to make sure that you always have that specific external reward there to give to the client. If you don't have it, motivation is going to be non-existent. I've got at the bottom of this slide a couple of questions that you're probably going to want to ask yourself in relation to your clients. First of all, what motivational orientation does your client have? You need to consider, how do I find that out? And that's obviously through your screening process and building a rapport. The better the rapport that you build, the more likely you are to have a true understanding of what motivates your client. Now, a generic motivational factor such as I want to lose weight, that's not enough. You need to truly understand, well, how much weight do you want to lose? Why do you want to lose the weight? And I suppose that's a really important question. Why is that your goal? If you can answer that question, then you have a true understanding of your client's motivational factors, which means you're going to be able to maximize their motivation and therefore hopefully as well the results that they achieve. Another question that I've put at the bottom there is, which type of motivation do you want to encourage? And I don't suppose there's a right and wrong answer to this question, although you're going to have preferences as to the type of client you prefer to work with, probably based on your motivational preferences. For me personally, I prefer working with intrinsically motivated clients because you can really focus on the process and they're a little bit more, they enjoy that process more, which is what you're there to provide. The extrinsic side of things takes care of itself. A couple of theories of motivation that we want to consider before we move on and look at Maslow's theory in a little bit more detail is the incentive theory, first of all. And this is a really basic theory that explains in particular extrinsic motivation really, really well. What this theory suggests is that if there are rewards in place that are attractive to that particular client, then they will be very highly motivated. This theory is quite closely related to the cognitive behavior theory, which looks at behavior change. And that theory is that if you're rewarded for a behavior, then you will repeat it. So linking those two theories together can be a very effective way of trying to change your client's behavior. We'll look at that cognitive behavior theory a little bit later on. The next theory is the drive theory, which is a very basic theory in that if you have a need, then you'll be motivated to meet that need. You will take whatever action is required for you to meet that. Now that can be something really, really simple. If you wake up in the morning and you're thirsty, then obviously you will have a drink. Now you're meeting your need, you're motivated to have a drink because you're thirsty to meet your need. Now obviously we can make that much more complex. If someone has that need of having an appearance in a certain way, they want to lose weight, then that is their need that they're trying to meet. So hopefully they would be motivated through the drive theory explanation to take the actions that are required there. The last one we have is the humanistic theory, which is demonstrated really well in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is what we're going to move on and look at now. Before we do that, we just want to take a quick look at the motivational environment. Obviously, when we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to look at how can we move them up that hierarchy. And to do that, we need to make sure that we create the optimal motivational environment that matches their motivational preferences. So for the intrinsically motivated, the environment that you need to create, first of all, needs to provide new learning and challenges. That's what they respond to. They want to be pushed. They want to measure themselves against previous performance. So promoting those comparisons is really important. That means you need to make sure you're recording everything that that client achieves. You can record everything that they eat and compare from week 1 to week 2 to week 3 and so on, and track their change. That's something that they're going to respond really positively to. As we said previously, you don't need to worry so much on the outcome. So you wouldn't necessarily need to be tracking this client's weight the whole way. You focus on the process, the dietary changes, that outcome takes care of itself. And it's something that these intrinsically motivated clients are not too stressed about. If, on the other hand, we look at those that are extrinsically motivated, how do we create an environment in which they enjoy and are highly motivated? First of all, we need to quite often provide relevant comparisons to others. Now, an important word there is the relevant part. If you've got someone who is obese and they're following a diet plan, there's no point in comparing that diet plan and those achievements with someone who is considered to be an elite athlete. You need to provide comparisons with someone that that client can relate to. So that's an environment that you need to set up. How you go about doing that, you need to be quite innovative. The next thing is you need to focus on the outcome. That's what they're really interested in, is the goal that they're trying to achieve. You need to have constant reference to that throughout the entire process. So if it's weight loss, then you're tracking their weight loss every single week. If it's muscle gain or losing body fat, then you're tracking body fat the whole way through. It's really important that in their motivational environment, you're providing regular success, and you're also recognizing that regular success as well. So if they achieve something, then you reinforce that they've achieved it and reward them. It's important that as much as possible, we avoid failure. If they fail, then motivation is without a doubt going to drop in this group. So as I said, one of the popular theories that is used to explain motivation is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what you can see from this slide is we have a pyramid that has 5 different levels. This theory suggests that in order to be motivated, you need to be striving to achieve one of these levels. You must achieve the level that's at the base of the pyramid and then work your way up. As you can see, those levels each have different titles. So at the bottom, we have our physiological needs, which is essentially the things that we need to stay alive. So one of the main ones down at the bottom that you guys would be involved with is the food part. Okay, and that is obviously a physiological need. If you don't meet that, then the rest of them do not really matter. Now, what's quite interesting about that is this food part is at the bottom. We're saying if you don't meet it, achieving any of the other steps is going to be quite difficult. How many clients do you have that are aiming to achieve self-esteem, confidence, achievement through their exercise programs, yet they're maybe not meeting their nutritional requirements? So this is really good at kind of almost selling what you're going to be offering to your clients. At the bottom of the pyramid, you have food. It's a basic physiological need. If you don't have that right, then none of the rest of the things further up are going to make any sense. So obviously you can address the food side of things on the bottom level. Next up, we have safety. So once we've met all these physiological needs, we can then start to address some of the safety needs. In terms of what you can help to provide for your client here is probably security of body. So you're making sure that their body functions in the way that it should. So functional training, correcting postural deviations, that all relates to the safety side of things. Can they move without injuring themselves? Next up, we have the love and belonging stage. And quite often, as a trainer, friendship is one of the most valuable things that you can offer your clients. So don't take away from what you can contribute to that level. Then obviously the next stage, esteem. You have so much that you can offer. The outcomes that people achieve through taking part in your training programs are going to be incredible. That's going to build confidence. They're going to recognize achievement. They'll get respect of others and respect by others as well. The last level is self-actualization, and this is quite a controversial part of the hierarchy of needs. It's self-actualization, and this is about reaching your potential. We'll talk about some of the limitations in a minute, but obviously by achieving the green level, the esteem, you can start to reach your potential. This theory is essentially suggesting that people will be motivated to meet each of these needs. It's important that we meet the needs at the bottom first before we then work our way up. Some of the limitations, however, with this theory is that some of the supporting evidence has really been questioned. It's quite an old theory, and obviously as more research has been done, people have started to raise a couple of issues with it. First of all, one of the questions is the hierarchical order. Does it need to be achieved in that way? Is that the correct order to have them in? And obviously we're suggesting that some of our clients are trying to achieve the esteem needs, which is second on that, second from top, when they maybe haven't addressed the food needs at the bottom. So there's obvious questions there. The next part is the requirement to meet previous levels prior to progressing to the next level. Some people are extremely successful and maybe have reached their potential within their field, yet they may well be overweight and they may well be unhealthy with very high blood pressure and following a horrible diet. So have they met the needs right at the bottom, yet have met self-actualization? That can happen, arguably. The other thing is that you can apply these theories to different settings. That's another argument. So someone might reach their potential in their job and work life, yet in terms of their health and well-being, they maybe have not met self-actualization. The next part is, how do you actually measure self-actualization? What does it have an actual quantifiable measurement? How do you measure someone's potential? Can they keep improving? So these are some of the main questions, and something that I suppose you need to consider if you are going to apply this theory to your clients. So that's section one that really covers motivation. What we now need to do is take a look at how we can then change behaviours. And as I said at the start in the introduction, this is one of the main things that you're really going to be trying to do when you're working with your clients. What we really have to recognise is that you're trying to change habits of a lifetime. It's quite likely that the clients that you're working with are going to have been following the same dietary habits and plans for years and years and years, hence why they perhaps find themselves in such a bad state potentially. And you need to recognise that this is going to be such a big deal for them. To you, it might not seem like a big change, but to them it is massive, and therefore it's really important that we have realistic expectations. An understanding of the underpinning theory and the different changing behaviour theories is so important so that you motivate your client in the way that is suited to them and matches their needs. And you can obviously apply things like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs to identify what they actually are. So one of the first theories that we're going to look at is the trans-theoretical model of change, or TMC for short. This is a really popular psychological theory that we use to explain the process of changing behaviour. It's got 6 main steps, which we'll look at in a second, and the idea is that they are a cycle and you move through each of these steps one by one. It's important as a trainer we recognise through the screening processes that we go through, so your Part Q and your lifestyle questionnaire and perhaps an interview, that you identify what stage is my client at. Once you identify the stage of readiness that they're at for changing their behaviour, you can manipulate your coaching processes, the types of activities that you set up, and the information that you deliver to your clients. As you'll see in a minute, it's entirely different depending on what stage of those 6 steps they're in. So here we have down the left-hand side of the slide, the 6 stages of the TMC. We've got pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and relapse. And as I said, the idea is that you work through from step 1, hopefully through to 5, but 6 may well happen. What I'm going to do is just give you a breakdown of what each steps mean. On the right of the slide, what you're going to see there is an explanation or example of how your client might sound as they're in each of those stages. So for stage 1, we've got pre-contemplation. To be honest, this is not a likely level that you're going to be working with clients at, because pre-contemplation is when they have no recognition that they need to make any change to their behavior. So your client might be saying, I don't need to change my diet, or I get enough exercise walking to the bus stop. They think the behavior that they have at the moment is completely fine and do not recognize the need to change. Whilst you might not work with these clients often, times when you would see yourself working with them is if you were setting up some sort of health initiative and you wanted to try and attract people who didn't recognize that they need to make a change into making that change. So if you have clients or potential clients in that stage, what you need to do is provide education that allows them to recognize, well, hold on a minute, the diet that I'm following maybe isn't as healthy as I first thought, or the diet that I'm following is having this impact on my health. It can be a very challenging process to get someone out of that pre-contemplation stage because they don't recognize it themselves. But again, innovation as to how you can get your client to buy into these ideas is really, really important. The second step is contemplation. So hopefully step 1's gone well. You've convinced the client or potential client that a change would be good. This contemplation part involves in weighing up what the pros and the cons are of actually making the change. So at this point, they might be saying things like, well, yeah, maybe my diet could be better. I'm eating out or having takeaways 3 or 4 times a week. Maybe I am a little bit overweight in the last few years of let myself go. These are the sorts of things that they are going to start saying. At this stage, what you need to do is continue the education process and highlighting the pros of that change. So a client, for example, might say, well, if I change my diet, then that means I'm going to have to give up, beers with the guys on a Friday night. I really enjoy that time. Okay, then you need to weigh up, well, yeah, the pros of changing would be that with less alcohol, weight loss is much more easily achieved. But the cons would be that I wouldn't be able to see my mates. What you would then need to do is put in solutions or meeting them halfway, giving them little strategies to overcome the barriers that they're identifying to the behavior change. Once you've got through that contemplation part, they then start to prepare for making the change. For you guys as the trainers, what this might involve is you setting up their diet plan. It might involve you writing the exercise plan. What you need to do here is make sure that it's extremely achievable and it matches the needs of the client. If it doesn't match the needs of the client, then the chances of them maintaining it or even reaching the action phase in the first place is very, very unlikely. In the preparation phase, clients are going to be starting to ask, okay, how much is the gym membership? How much does it cost for a session with you? How much to sit down and talk about my diet? They might start asking, okay, well, you've mentioned I can replace this food with this food. Where can I buy those healthy alternatives? We then move into the action, which is quite obviously when they're actually carrying out that new behavior, which is obviously what we're aiming for. It's really important here that we provide a lot of support. These new behaviors are very unfamiliar and it can be quite intimidating for the client. They can feel a little bit lost at times. They can quite often get a bad reaction to changing their habits. If they have, or maybe cutting out carbohydrates and they have these cravings for sugar, they feel really lethargic and tired and lack motivation, you need to provide a lot of support at this time. So you really need to consider, how am I going to do that? Once you have reached the action stage, you then hope to maintain it. And again, it's really important here that support is provided. Once you get into the maintenance phase, don't assume that that's going to last forever. Different barriers are going to crop up all the time. For example, a classic one is the festive period. So around Christmas, people tend to be off work, they're eating and drinking a lot more, and that can cause them to then slip into the relapse in stage 6. So what you need to do here as the trainer that's providing dietary advice or an exercise program is make sure you have strategies that can overcome those barriers. If they do happen to move into relapse, it's not game over entirely. what you need to make sure that your client does is re-enters this behaviour change model as soon as possible and as far down the model as possible as well. So ideally you want them to go back to the action phase and then into maintenance. However, bear in mind that the relapse may have been caused by them becoming bored or fed up with the process, so they may well need to actually go through the contemplation and preparation again. And for example, that might be you saying, right, this diet didn't work for you, you've come into a relapse, let's look at different changes that we can make instead of what we've gone with before. I really like this theory for explaining the processes, and it's very easy to allocate your client to a particular level just through clever questioning. So it's something next time you screen a client, keep this theory in mind so that you can relate them to the different stages and think, right, how do I best approach it so that I can have an impact on their behaviour change. The next theory is the cognitive behaviour approach, and this one's a little bit more straightforward. To be honest, it doesn't have as many components, and the actual process of motivating someone is really much simpler. So this theory states that behaviours are governed by our attitudes, thoughts, and beliefs. So what we think or what our opinion is on something is going to determine how we act, and that really does make sense. If we think something is good for us, then hopefully we're going to consume more of it. If we know something's bad for us and could have a detrimental effect on our health or our well-being, then hopefully we're going to avoid it. If we want to change behaviour, then this theory suggests that the first thing we need to address is someone's attitudes, what they think about a particular thing and what they believe. How we go about doing that is largely through educating your clients. Telling them this food is good, this food is bad, if you keep up these dietary habits then this is what could happen, and so on. That education is so important. The other part of this theory is looking at reinforcement and positive reinforcement. If you have a client where they are wanting to change a behaviour and they start to make progress and actually make those changes, if you recognise it and give some positive feedback around it, then they're much more likely to repeat the behaviour. If you ignore it and don't respond to the fact that they've done something good, then they're not going to be motivated to repeat the behaviour again. This is something that you can also look at from the other perspective. If someone does something bad, what do? Do you reinforce negatively? And generally most research would say you're more likely to change behaviour if you positively reinforce, i.e. rewarding good behaviour, than you are if you punish bad behaviour. So we're moving away from punishing something that is wrong and rewarding the things that are right. The last part that we're going to consider today is goal setting. And this is obviously something that's very closely related to motivation and to changing behaviour. A lot of the terms on this slide you should be familiar with from your Cert 4 in fitness, but it's really important that we recap them. So the first thing is the SMART principle, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, rewarding, and time-limited goals. Each of these components of a goal are incredibly important. If you miss one, then the chance of actually achieving a goal is much less likely. So let's just break each of those points down to start with. Specific is really important, and this is really referring to the amount of detail that you have within your goal. The more detail you provide, the more clarity there is for your client in judging what is it I'm trying to achieve. And that will allow you to set clearer processes to allow them to achieve that goal. This also relates nicely to the measurable component. It's really important that you have as many measurable parts to your goal as possible. If you can't measure achievement, then the goal is entirely pointless. So something like losing weight, that's measurable to an extent. You can see that the number's gone down. We can make that even more measurable by saying, let's lose X amount of weight in this period of time. So you've got the amount of weight that you're losing and how long you're doing it in. There's two measurable components there. The more measurable components, the better the goal. The goal obviously needs to be achievable, so it must be realistic, and obviously you're considering everything that you've identified in the screening as to what is achievable for that client. And this is something that obviously takes a little bit of time to work out how to implement. when you first start designing diets for your clients, when you get out into the industry with this qualification, you may find that quite often clients are coming back and saying, that's too difficult, I'm not capable of meeting those demands within the diet, it felt horrible, for example. What you would then maybe start doing is saying, well, let's make one change this week, and then we'll add another change next week, and that breaks it down into something that's much more achievable. Rewarding is obviously incredibly important as well. You need to make sure that the goal is something that that client wants to achieve. If they don't want to achieve it, they're not going to be motivated to achieve it, and they're not going to achieve it either. And lastly, time limited, and this is something that people will often miss out. They'll say, yeah, I want to lose this amount of weight, but they don't say by when, and that reduces the accountability that a client has for their goal massively. If they set a time limit, then they know this is when I'm going to be measured and checked to see if I've reached this goal, and that can be a huge motivator. As I said, missing one of these is going to make your goal a lot poorer. In terms of goals, we've got two different forms. We have outcome goals and we have process-based goals. An outcome goal, as it suggests, focuses on the end result or end product. So for someone with weight loss, that would be their target weight. So they maybe weigh 80 kilos, their target weight is 70 kilos. That's their outcome goal. Generally, this is the more long-term goal. So we want to break goals down into their time periods as well. And as I said, outcome goals will tend to be more long-term. That said, incorporating a couple of outcome goals along the way can also be great. So you might have that 6-month deadline to lose 10 kilos, and then you break that into smaller chunks where you're maybe losing 1 kilo every month or whatever it might be. The process-based goals obviously focus on the steps that you take to achieve the outcome. Generally, these are short and medium-term based. So obviously focusing on the dietary changes that you need to make, focusing on the exercise habits that you need to follow, and the behaviour changes that are required so that you achieve the outcome. The point that I've got at the bottom of the slide is incredibly important here, because if you set too many outcome-based goals for someone who's intrinsically motivated, it's not going to be something that they want to achieve. It's not rewarding for them. And likewise, if you set too many process-based goals for someone who's extrinsically motivated, then they're not going to be motivated because it's not rewarding for them. So as well as having a combination of outcome and process goals, the short, medium and long-term goals, you need to work into that goal setting process. How are they actually motivated? A couple of other tips that you can follow in setting goals is firstly, involving the client. I believe this is incredibly important. A lot of trainers out there will say, right, this is what you want to achieve, this is how we're going to do it, here's your goals for month 1, month 2, and so on. If the client has had limited input, they don't feel like it's their own goal, they feel like it's the trainer's goal. And what happens there is they then pass ownership of that goal to the trainer. So they no longer feel responsible for achieving it themselves. They think, well, you set the goal for me, you need to get me there. And that's a dangerous route to go down, because that's going to end up with them not taking accountability for their actions and perhaps not changing their behaviours in the way that they should. So really make sure that you have constant consultation with your client on the goals that you're setting. So important. Starting with the end in mind is an obvious step to take. So setting the long-term outcome goal and then chunking it back from there is going to provide you with a clear process. If you know what that outcome goal is that you're aiming for, then as a trainer and through the qualifications that you've done, you'll be able to work out, well, this is how we can get the client there. So set that one first. Something that's really important is to actually write the goals down, and I found this really effective working with clients. If a client sets a goal but it's just in their head, they don't write it down, again, that accountability, it's not as strong as it could be. If that client writes the goal down, you have a copy of it, your client has a copy of it that they stick up in the fridge or whatever, they'll see it constantly, they'll be reminded of it, and they'll be motivated to do it. If, likewise, you tell someone, this is what I'm hoping to achieve, they'll ask you how you're progressing with it. And again, that sets little reminders, and the client will feel responsible for achievement of that goal. Something that's really important is reviewing the goals on a regular basis. And you'll find that you do this if you set short-term goals well. If you just set that one long-term outcome goal, then what you're going to find is that the client may not be on track, you don't make changes, they fail in achieving that outcome goal, they lack motivation, they don't come back to you because you didn't get them where they wanted to be. If you review it regularly and track progress towards the goals and tick off the goals as they're achieved, then it becomes much clearer to you as to how your client is progressing. So it's something that I really recommend, that you have regular dates set into the training program or to the dietary plans where you review progress. Quite often when you initially start out with clients, that could be very regular. And then as you become more confident that they've changed behavior and they're on track, you can kind of space out those review dates a little bit more. And lastly, making adjustments is so important. If you see that your client is not going to achieve a goal, then you make an adjustment to the goal so that they do achieve it. As we said at the start, success is so important to keep a client motivated. Likewise, if you see that a client is way ahead of track, so say for example you've set a goal at 3 months and they've achieved it at the end of month 2, you then set a new goal for month 3. Because if you don't, then motivation will drop between months 2 and 3, and that can lead to that relapse, which then could lead to all that hard work being without reward. That's everything from me in terms of the content, guys. What I'll be doing is staying online if you guys have any questions that you want answered. I hope you find this PowerPoint useful. It's a little bit of an introduction to the particular unit. What we'll move on to look at in the next PowerPoint, which is in a few weeks' time, is examining then how do you turn that into an effective coaching process, so the actual interaction with your clients once they're in there in the action and maintenance phase.